Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. The Greens were almost wiped out in last week's election in the Republic. Why have voters on both sides of the border turned their backs on the party? The Greens Northern Ireland leader Mal O'Hara joins me live from Dublin. Plus, with no end in sight to the traffic congestion in Belfast, what's the impact on trade in the all-important run-up to Christmas? We'll assess the picture with a panel of experts. And here to share her thoughts on all of that and more, I'm joined by the Belfast Telegraph's political editor, Suzanne Brie. There's no sugarcoating last week's election results for the Green Party. The outgoing junior coalition partner returns to the new Dáil with just one seat. As well as losing 11 TDs, the party's share of the vote dropped by more than 4 percentage points. In the 2022 Stormont Assembly election, the party lost both its seats. Senator Mal O'Hara is leader of the party in Northern Ireland and sits in the Seanad for now, and he joins me from Dublin. Welcome to you. Thanks very much indeed for making time for us this morning. What, first of all, is your assessment of what went wrong 10 days ago?
Well, I think, Mark, there's a curse for the junior coalition partner. We've seen that in the Republic previously with ourselves in 2011 and with Labour in 2016. I think the people have spoken, they've made their decision. We will regroup, and we're already re-energised as this weekend we have the European Green Federation, 400 delegates from Green parties across Europe in Dublin. And they are parties who have had similar experiences and regrouped and gone back into government. And I think, Mark, it's important to say that in 2011, the Greens were wiped out. And in 2020, just 9 years later, they had their best ever election in the Republic and entered government and made seismic change in that government. Yeah,
and that may be true, but there's no guarantee, of course, that you can repeat that trick this time around. I mean, if ever Green policies should be striking a chord with voters, surely it is now, and you are frankly going in the wrong direction.
Well, Michael, Mark, I would take exception to that in the North. In the Westminster election we just had in July, Greens in Northern Ireland had their best ever election result. More people voted Green than ever before in Northern Ireland when it was only a first past the post system. We stood more candidates, and most of those battles were in tight tactical seats such as East Belfast, South Belfast, North Belfast and North Down, but more people voted Green than ever before. And I'm determined to rebuild the party in the North so that we go back into the Assembly in our scheduled election in 2027. And I have no...
Well, look, it's a low base, that's the point, isn't it? It's a low base. You may have done okay in the general election. Elections are about winning seats, not about share of the vote, and you didn't win any seats. In 2022, Claire Bailey lost her Assembly seat. In 2023, you lost your councillor seat. In the local Northern Ireland Council elections in 2019, we should remind people you had 8 seats. 2023, you got 5 seats. So you are, in terms of winning seats, you're moving in the wrong direction.
And Mark, I think in terms of the most recent election, we had our best ever result for a Westminster. And I would say that we had a period of political instability in Northern Ireland. And I've said this repeatedly to you and others, that the DUP handed Sinn Féin an open goal in 22 and 2023 by refusing to allow Michelle O'Neill to become First Minister. So many people who were minded to vote Green tactically voted Sinn Féin to give the DUP a bloody nose. I'm determined that we will be back in the Assembly in 2027 and we'll expand our council seats. And I'm sure
but you need to be very careful, do you not, in a serious conversation like this, that you don't sound a bit complacent with the greatest respect. You've just lost 11 seats in the Irish Parliament. You are now sitting as the leader of the Northern Ireland Green Party in the Seanad, and Roderick O'Gorman, who's the leader of the Green Party in Dublin, is sitting in the Dáil, and that's it as far as those two houses are concerned. And that's quite confusing as well for people, I think, if you're the Northern Ireland leader and you're sitting, of course, in a different jurisdiction.
Well, I think, Mark, actually, that's symptomatic of the network of interwoven relationships across these islands. I would say if you look at the Greens in Scotland, you look at the Greens in England, who had their best ever election result, winning 4 seats, including in rural shires in Tory constituencies, that the Greens are on the rise in the rest of the UK. So the network of relationships across these islands will give us energy and will allow us to rebuild. We'll be back in the Assembly, and I've no doubt that there will be more Green TDs in the next election in the Republic.
OK, well, that's 5 years away. There is, however, going to be a Seanad election in February. You have a seat. You were unopposed for that seat whenever you took it a while back. Is it your intention at this stage, can you say, to allow your name to go forward in that election?
Yeah, the party's currently undergoing a process, Mark. I think it's vitally important that the next incarnation of Seanad Éireann has Northern representation. And I'm currently minded to put my hat in the ring for one of those seats.
And how optimistic would you be? Because it's going to be tight, isn't it? If you look at what's happened in the Dáil, it is not going to be a walk in the park for you to hang on to that seat.
No, Mark, and I'm a pragmatist and a realist. I think when I was on your show in March, we talked about, I was very confident that I would secure the seat in April, and I did. This time it might be a little bit tougher, but my hat may be in the ring, and we'll see. I'll do the hard work, and the outcome will be in February.
OK, let me ask you this question, Mal O'Hara. If Green politics are so important, and if you're so optimistic that they do strike a chord with the electorate, even though 11 seats were lost in the election 10 days ago, how come Friends of the Earth assessed all the main party manifestos against faster and fairer climate action, and the Green Party was ranked third after Labour and the Social Democrats? How could the party allow that to happen?
Well, I think, Mark, actually, if you look at what we've delivered, the government from 2020 until November has been transformative for the environment. Emissions are at their lowest levels, a 7% reduction in 2023. They're at their lowest levels in 30 years. We've massively reduced transport fares. 20% reduction, 60% for young people. We've 2 new rural bus routes every week, getting on 1 million passengers using public transport. And that's a huge sea change in terms of emissions.
Okay, but
while others can put policy forward, let's put it up to them and say you have a moral duty where you get a vote to go into government and make change rather than
but look, here's the harsh reality. The voters had their say. The Green Party lost 11 seats. And in that survey, Friends of the Earth said, while finding a strong commitment to government leadership, the Green Party lacked the big picture vision and bolder ambition of higher ranked parties. It found the party's responses to areas like heating, protection of those on low income and the practice of below cost selling in supermarkets were weaker than those proposed by Labour or the Social Democrats. I ask you again, how did you allow that to happen?
Let's see what environmental changes the next government make, and let's see if Labour or the Social Democrats are brave enough to go in or instead sit on the opposition benches and try and build their own party for electoral success. Getting elected is about making change, Mark. Let's be brave enough to go into government, whether Soc Dems or Labour, and make it change for the environment and keep on that path of reducing emissions, which the Greens implemented in this period of government.
What is your intention in terms of your involvement in politics if you are unsuccessful in February's Seanad election? I mean, can you, without any political office or a political seat, north or south of the border, continue to lead the Green Party in Northern Ireland, do you think?
Yes, indeed, Mark. And I've committed to the party that I will lead us into an assembly election in 2027. And I'm determined that we will reclaim an assembly seat and we'll be back in the assembly. OK, well, that's what you hope. But of course, you have no guarantee. And somehow or other, you've got to strike a chord with voters and inspire them in precisely the way that your party seems not to have been able to do in the recent Dáil elections, and certainly not in the most recent council and assembly elections here in the north. But Mark, again, you're ignoring the Westminster election, which is the most recent one in July of this year, where we had our best ever result in tight tactical battles. And I'm going to build on that and make sure that we're back in the Assembly in 27. OK, well, you're pinning a lot to that Westminster election result. We will watch with interest to see what happens in Dublin in that Seanad election in February. For now, Mal O'Hara, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Let's assess that with the Belfast Telegraph's Suzanne Breen, who's been listening to what Senator Mal O'Hara has had to say. Well, look, he's putting a brave face on pretty difficult results for the party, north and south.
He is indeed, and you wouldn't expect him to do any different. Certainly the loss of the 2 assembly seats in the north was a huge blow to the Green Party. They need back there in Stormont because they need public visibility. When people aren't seeing on their TV screens in debate Green MLAs present, then that has a knock-on effect. But truthfully, it is very hard to see which constituencies the Greens are going to break through in at the moment. I think it's a very challenging situation for them. In the south, It isn't a case that climate action was more important in 2020 than it is now in 2024 to people. But voters do not vote in a vacuum. The cost of living, the housing crisis, they affect Green voters just as much as they do everybody else. And I think that scoring by Friends of the Earth, when the Greens were really far behind Labour and the Social Democrats, was pretty important and fairly damning for the party in many ways. I mean, Labour was scored 79%, the Social Democrats 71%, and the Greens were on 63%. That is a considerable distance to be behind in something that is really core to your existence, climate action.
Yeah, and when you look at the actual numbers behind what Mal O'Hara was talking about there, he put a lot into the success, as he described it, of the Green Party in July's Westminster election. And just to remind people, that was 8,692 votes across all of the constituencies where the party stood, 1.1% of the vote, up 0.9% of the vote, and obviously no seats. So the numbers are small. It may have been the best ever, but the numbers are small.
The numbers are really small, and look, that's a really good base for the party holding on to its existing council seats. But I can't see when it comes to assembly level really where they are going to break through, and they most definitely need to do so. I think what was probably most depressing about them was that the two Green MLAs most certainly did punch above their weight in Stormont, and yet they weren't rewarded by the electorate.
It's pretty clear, it's absolutely clear, that the Green Party is going to have no part in the government going forward in the Republic of Ireland, having been part of that coalition, of course, in recent years, losing 11 seats Friday a week ago. Coalitionology is now the big discussion point, of course, in the South at the moment. What is your assessment of precisely where that conversation is going?
Well, I think there have been informal talks, maybe over a pint I read, between Micheál Martin and Simon Harris in recent days. Those talks are going to become much more formal. They seem to be disagreeing over the rotating Taoiseach. Fine Gael is saying that they want parity, 2.5 years each in the Taoiseach's office. And Fianna Fáil is saying, well, we got 10 seats more. We want 3 years. We'll give you 2 years. And I think a lot of people who are really struggling at the moment will think that this is, very petty to be arguing over something like this. We would have expected Fianna Fáil to take more cabinet seats, given that it was ahead in both the popular vote and in terms of seats. But I think most people probably thought that the rotating Taoiseach on an equal basis was going to be a reality. But certainly if the Social Democrats and Labour are looking at the Greens' experience, then they will be staying a million miles from government, because it doesn't matter what they achieve in government, it is really political suicide.
Well, it's very interesting to keep an eye on over the weeks, maybe the months ahead. Suzanne, for now, thanks very much indeed. We'll talk to you a little bit later in the programme, of course. Let's turn to the much reported traffic disruption across Belfast. How much of it is simply due to pre-Christmas trade, and how badly is it impacting on the city's retail and hospitality sectors? Shauna Core is environment correspondent at Belfast Live. Michael Stewart is Belfast's nighttime czar, and Lynn Roberts is from Retail NI. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Lynn Roberts, first of all, what kind of impact has the traffic disruption that has been so widely reported and experienced by so many people in recent days and weeks having on your sector specifically?
Well, it's having a very serious impact, because people shouldn't forget that Belfast city centre is not just another city centre. It's a regional economic driver for the whole of the Northern Ireland economy. And we have seen continuing problems with congestion result in people going to a lot of the big out-of-town stores, or indeed to other towns. So I think the key point here is that the communication and coordination from the Department of Infrastructure has been very poor. And, questions need to be asked. Why was two major projects, the Sydenham bypass and indeed the transport hub, happening at the same time? Because Christmas is the harvest time for the retail and hospitality sectors. It's the time of year where our members make the significant amount of income which sustains their business throughout the rest of the year. But I also want to get across, Mark, and this is very, very important, the hard work traders in Belfast City Centre are doing to make sure consumers have a fun, family-friendly destination and experience. We've had lots of new retailers located in the city centre, new hospitality businesses. So they have a really, really good competitive offer this year. So I think I want to get very much across that Belfast City Centre is open for business and has a lot to offer consumers.
You talked about roadworks there, of course, and the department's made it very clear. Those big roadworks, which have been causing so much difficulty for commuters, have been paused in the run-up to Christmas.
Yes, but I think we'd have liked to see that moratorium brought forward a lot earlier, because people start their Christmas shopping earlier every year, working families now.
But it's in place now, that's the point.
It is, but I
think...
So
it wasn't part of what happened on Thursday night?
Well, I think that there were a number of different factors that happened on Thursday night, but still, I don't think there were anything too out of the ordinary to cause the congestion that happened. I think a lot of this is down to poor communication from the Department of Infrastructure, poor coordination. For instance, there's an oversight group that has been set up with TransLink, with the Department of Infrastructure and the Council. Business is not, as far as I'm aware, business is not representative now. It has not communicated to us. So I think that the most basic thing that they need to get right is good communication. Coordinate, work with business, work with all the other stakeholders.
Yeah, but if you were on that, you'd be just saying we don't want any roadworks any time of the year. Thanks very much indeed.
No, absolutely not, because we believe the transport hub will be a game changer for our transport infrastructure. The Sydenham bypass certainly needs to be upgraded. And let me just say this. We want to see people use public transport as their first option, sure, and not their last option.
And we're going to get on to talk about that now. Michael Stewart, we saw a communication, a press release issued by the Department of Infrastructure on Friday talking about Thursday night's difficulties, and I've got it in front of me here. It talks about the traffic being typical of this time of year. It also talks about the traffic gridlock on Thursday being due to a number of accidents and a set of traffic lights being out of action. Does that wash with you?
They're the facts of the matter. That did happen. Belfast was very busy still on Thursday in hospitality. I think one of the big differences, obviously, is hospitality operates throughout the day and the evening. Probably a bit more impact during the day for venues, but lesser so at night because the traffic eased. I think part of the problem here is, as Glyn says, there's not enough communication, there's not enough joined up writing, and when that task force does come, businesses need to be represented on that so that we know what's happening down the line.
Of course, the Minister has pointed out that when you are sitting in traffic complaining about the difficulties around you, you need to remember that you are the traffic. Is your message to your patrons who are coming in to enjoy the nighttime economy that they should think long and hard about not driving to do so, that they should cycle or they should use a bus or use the train?
Cycling is probably a bit harder when you're coming out for your Christmas night out, I would guess, but I've been in hospitality for 39 years, and no matter what, people go out with, certain people of a certain age go out with military precision. They want to know how they're getting there, where they're going, who they're going with, and most importantly, how they're getting home safe. Currently, TransLink have a late night bus and train service operating for Christmas until the 21st of December. People need to use that, because if they do, then we can get to the real crux of this, where we need a transport system that's fit for purpose and 52 weeks of the year.
OK, so let me just ask you this before we hear from Shauna. Are these difficulties having an impact in terms of the takings that your members are experiencing at the moment? Are they actually finding it hard to get the turnover that they would expect to be having at this time of the year? Or are people coming anyway?
People are coming, yes.
So there's no material impact on our bars and restaurants?
It wouldn't appear so. The hospitality industry is very stoic. We've come through COVID, we came through the Troubles, and we came through Storm Dara yesterday. So the sparkly dresses were out last night, the Christmas jumpers were out. How they were out in that storm, I don't know, but they were. People are out to have a good time. We talked about the harvest period for Christmas. There's a golden quarter, which is October, November and December. That's where the impact hurt harder in October and November. But at Christmas, people are out and they will continue to come out.
OK. Shauna Corr, you're coming at this from a different perspective as an environment correspondent for Belfast Live. What's your assessment of the situation that Belfast is having to deal with at the moment?
Mark, it's a mess. It's been a mess for a long time. You know, if you read back even into what the Department for Infrastructure have been saying themselves, you know, they said 2 years ago, the road network in Belfast is at full capacity. The car's been king in Northern Ireland for decades, and nothing seems to be changing with that anytime soon. So we've got, successive governments that have put all of the money in terms of transport into keeping the road infrastructure up, and as a result, public transport has suffered, active travel has suffered, and the sound bites that we get coming from government on a consistent basis are all very much, people need to take the train, they need to take the bus, they need to take they need to get on their bike. But at the end of the day, if the government isn't putting in place the changes that are needed to make those options attractive to everyday people going about their everyday business, people are not going to make that shift. It's too difficult for folks. Buses are too expensive, public transport's too expensive. We had Mal O'Hara on earlier talking about how the Greens in the south reduced public transport fares by 20%. They've also made public transport free for children in the south. In Northern Ireland, the only people that get free transport are pensioners, and even the pensioners are finding it difficult to use them because the bus services aren't there and the train services aren't there.
Well, some people will wonder if there is a joined-up approach here, because we've got a new transport hub which isn't fully functional yet, but nonetheless it's up and running. We've got Durham Street closed, we've got a new bus lane layout, we've got a new road layout in Belfast. There seem to be an awful lot of moving parts, and I got stuck in that traffic on Thursday night and it was absolutely horrendous. And yes, TransLink and the Department of Infrastructure can say use public transport. The buses were stuck as well. There were so many cars stuck at so many junctions, the buses couldn't get through to use the new bus lanes.
Yeah, it was horrendous. I actually cycled into work. It was
horrendous.
Yeah, it was awful. And I did cycle into work on Thursday and took my bike home. But even as a cyclist in the middle of that was really scary, because you've got cars at every junction. They're all backed up. You could see people getting angry. They're all sitting blurring their horns and getting really frustrated with the fact that no one is going anywhere. And
so the question is, would it not maybe have made sense, if you're going to do what you're going to do with the transport hub and Durham Street, and yes, you want to encourage people onto public transport, do you need also not to make it so difficult for people who are going to use cars by introducing so many bus lanes? For example, on Bruce Street there's a bus lane up the middle of it. It can make it quite difficult for drivers. And then the Dublin Road, which used to be 3 lanes, is now 1 lane. Again, it's very difficult to get through. And we've got various roads now right in the centre of town where you can't turn left, you can't go straight ahead where you used to be able to. Listen to the Nolan programme and listen to taxi drivers and bus drivers complaining about having to do an extra mile around City Hall.
Well, I take your point, but at the end of the day, if you're going to get people to make the switch, you need to put public transport first, and you need to put active travel first. And, the cars have been first for a very, very, very long time. In the Climate Act, the government was given a task to make sure that 10% of their spending is going on active travel. So that would be greenways, that would be cycleways. That doesn't include the funding that's going into our public transport, which is also the least well funded in any part of these aisles. Public transport in Northern Ireland gets very little compared to public transport in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland.
I suspect people listening to this conversation today who don't live or work in Belfast saying, I wish we had the level of public transport and access that people in Belfast have.
And I hear their pain. I grew up in Tyrone, and if you turned 17, the first thing you were doing was getting your driving licence, because there was no other way to get around. My mum still lives there. She says in order to get into the local town, there's a bus that goes at 10 a.m. in the morning and one that comes home at 6 o'clock at night. And that just doesn't work for people.
And are you worried, Glenn Roberts, just picking up on that point from Shauna, that actually people will vote with their feet? They will decide, well, I'm not going to come in from Dungannon, or I'm not coming in from Lisburn or from Bangor or from Larne or wherever, maybe Ballymena, Ballymoney, to Belfast to shop as I do every Christmas. I'm going to stay at home and shop. And if they make that decision, that's bad for your members.
Well, it is, but I can point out that we represent members in every village, town and city, so it's not just Belfast that has a very competitive offer, other towns have as well.
So it's, there you go, you see, so it's bad for your members in Belfast, but potentially good for your members outside Belfast.
But I think looking at the bigger picture, given that Belfast city centre is a regional economic driver, if it is suffering, then our whole economy is suffering. And let's make one important point here. 50% of the cars or through traffic in Belfast city centre. So it's not that the city centre is their final destination. And we're very, very clear. We want to see people use public transport as their first option and not their last option.
But it has to work.
Yes, it has to work. It's about moving people and not cars. So we recognise the hub. when it is completed, will be a game changer. But we have a lot of work to do to try and get that message out there.
And Michael, Stuart, just a final thought from you very quickly, if you would. Your message clearly is that Belfast, despite all of the maybe bad publicity, as some people might see it, that the city has had in recent weeks, it is still open for business in the run-up to Christmas.
Belfast is absolutely, definitely open for business. I would encourage people to utilise the late-night transport that is there. There are late-night buses, there are late-night trains, and we really need to get those in use, because that will be a great argument to go back to Stormont to say we need buses and late-night trains, buses and trains 52 weeks of the year.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Sean, just a quick final thought with you. 30 seconds, if you would, on what Mal O'Hara was saying and the scale of the mountain that he and his party have to climb north and south of the border in the months and indeed years ahead.
It was a huge shame, both sides of the border, to be honest. You know, the Greens have delivered quite a lot, but I think where they fall down really is shouting from the rooftops the changes that they've actually delivered for people. In some scenarios, you might say that they're too nice and they're not really willing to go toe-to-toe with other parties on those issues and allow people to take, you know, the credit for what they've delivered.
OK. Thank you all very much indeed. Very interesting to hear your thoughts. Let's just close the programme with Suzanne, who's been listening to all of that. In terms of Belfast and the problems that there clearly have been with transport, who's responsible for sorting it out, in your view?
Well, ultimately, it is the Minister, John O'Dowd, the Infrastructure Minister. He's been very strong in other ministerial portfolios he has, and I think he really needs to get to grip with this situation as soon as possible. People getting from A to B is a fundamental. It is absolutely integral to people's daily lives. You have mums leaving kids off to school and then either having to pick them up, not being able to, or pick them up from childminders. We have traffic lights that are broken in an afternoon and they're not fixed to the next morning. And amidst all the chaos of last week, there was a video that was tweeted out by the Department of Infrastructure, and it showed a guy going about his daily journey with his fold-up bike. Now, a fold-up bike is not something that is really going to work for a mum with her kids. But apart from that, and again, in a cost of living crisis here, that bike was priced at £1,200. So while we have all this criticism of a car-centric society, we really need to make public transport more accessible and a hell of a lot cheaper. It should not be about punishing drivers. It should be about improving public transport, and we routinely fail to do that.
Just briefly, John O'Dowd might well say he is the Minister for Infrastructure, but you know, he's one man and he can't be responsible for solving all of these problems single-handedly.
No, he can't, and then he needs to, I think, be fairly stern with a lot of his officials, because the people certainly behind planning and responsible for traffic flow in Belfast should hang their heads in shame over recent weeks. OK, we've got to leave it there. We're out of time. Interesting conversation. Thank you all very much indeed. Suzanne, good to see you as ever. That is all we've time for this week. I'm back on Thursday with The View at the usual time of 10:40 on BBC One and iPlayer. Do join me for that. For now, though, from all of us, have a good day. Bye-bye.